Greetings and welcome back, fellow masters of lore, champions of the dice, weavers of fate. This is Rookie DM. My name is Ben, and we are continuing to talk about the Bessar campaign. I don't have a name for this campaign yet, but if you have any ideas as you're listening to this, let me know down in the comments below, because we are talking about sessions 2 through 4. If you have not watched the first couple videos, this is the 4th video ever on this channel. It's a brand new channel. I'm here to talk about my early experiences as a DM, share with you some of my thoughts, lessons that I've learned, mistakes I made, ways I'm adjusting, things that have worked well, and hopefully demystify the process of DMing a little bit and encourage you to run your own game. I'm having a blast doing this. I love doing this. I think it's a ton of fun, and I think that you will find it fun too, or hopefully you will. Just to recap, this is a long-form homebrew campaign in a homebrew world. We're using D&D 5e 2024 rules for this campaign. I ran the first 9 sessions of this campaign for a different group before I had to leave due to a family medical issue. And then now, so many months later, I am able to jump back into the world of Bessar, or the world of Avarian, the continent of Bessar, and talk about this awesome campaign that or at least I think it's awesome. I think it's fun, that I spent 2 or 3 years writing and coming up with. I still have tons and tons and tons of writing and work to do, but I at least have kind of the bones, the raw, rough outline of the world, the major powers, the major players in this world, and a rough idea of where this campaign is going to go, which I'm excited to share with you all as time goes on. I'm kind of spending the first few videos sort of catching you all up to where we are in the campaign. With the second campaign, with the second group, I am about 3 or 4 sessions in. I don't remember exactly. So with this video, I'm going to catch you all up to where we are with the second group. So we started off marooned on a beach after a ship mysteriously exploded. After the first session, between sessions, I messaged each of the players individually and said something to the effect of, as you are standing on this beach, memories from the fateful night before begin to flood your mind again. You vaguely remember, and then I gave each of the players a tiny little tidbit of the events that unfolded on the ship. So, for example, the druid, being a master of nature, I told, you were standing aboard the deck of the ship when the storm blew in, and you, being attuned to magic that stems from nature and connected with nature itself, felt like the storm, the way that it blew in and how fast it grew, was not natural. Something felt off to you about that. And that storm should not have been enough to destroy. No, actually, I didn't tell. There was another player who is a sailor or had a history at sea. I told, you have a sense that that storm should not have been enough to destroy a ship of that size, but yet somehow it seems like it did. That's weird. Another player, I said, you, in the cabin next to you, you very briefly overheard a conversation and the word Sybil, S-Y-B-I-L, was mentioned. You don't really know what it means. Another player, I told, you saw a mysterious figure moving at an unnatural speed, just like darting down a hallway. Another player, I told, you saw a dark cloaked figure with a girl of roughly 10 to 12 years of age rush up to the deck of the ship in the middle of the storm, which you thought was a little bit weird and suspicious, so you decided to follow them. But when you got up to the deck of the ship, they were gone. And then finally, another player, I told that you, during a flash of lightning on top of the ship, you very briefly saw the outline of another ship about 100 or 200 feet away through the storm, but you only see it when the lightning flashed in the darkness. So each of them got a piece of this story. And the first group that I did this with, and different number of players, so different things got seeded, but the gist of it is what I just told you. And the first group never shared any of that with each other. I don't know if they just forgot about it or what, but it never became an RP moment. And this was the way that I did this, messaging them on Discord privately between sessions, served a couple of purposes. One, it's fun and it's interesting. Like, how often do you have stuff going on between sessions? Not very often. And, a lot of times it doesn't make sense to do that. But in this particular case, having playing up this amnesia type of thing, like the idea that this explosion or the ship crash was so traumatic that you're even struggling to remember what happened that night, gave me a great excuse to sort of engage with the players in the middle of the 2-week break that we have. If you do a session every 2 weeks, which is what the pace that we're at, it helps. I sent them those messages around the 1 week mark. So just to kind of keep them engaged, especially early on, brand new players, new story, etc. The other purpose it was supposed to serve was an interesting RP moment, because I thought, in the game, I'll be like, oh, as you're walking through this cave, do you say anything to each other? I'm trying to encourage RP moments and create room for that. And I was hoping that someone would bring up, I vaguely remember seeing the outline of a ship when the lightning flashed. Did you guys see anything? The first group never did that. The second group did, though, which was really cool. And I thought it was really awesome. And so they began to share their pieces and realized those are pieces of a bigger story that they all kind of fit together pretty nicely, which was very intentional on my part. And one of the players said, Cybele, do I know anything about that? And it's a player that has a pretty good history. And I said, go ahead and roll history. And he rolled a 23 or something. I don't remember what it was, but it was high, especially for level 2. And so I said, yeah, you actually know. So in this world, a Cybele is and if you actually look this up, this is actually a real word. I didn't make this up. It is always a woman, and it's a woman with the gift of foresight, essentially. But in the case of my world, they also have, in a way, sort of an innate scrying ability. So they have the ability to see not only into possible futures, but also what's happening now anywhere in the world. And it's not even a magical ability. It's an innate ability. Now, Cybeles are very rare, very rare. And it takes training for them to learn how to hone their skills. But with the nature of it, I almost think of it in kind of attuned to a sorcerer in a way of you just have this innate magical ability within you, but you have to learn how to hone and harness that. And so Cybeles typically start manifesting these abilities around puberty. So around for the sake of this world, we're gonna say around 10 to 12 years of age, maybe 13 at the latest. And as these abilities grow, they start to go blind, which creates some interesting dynamics. So all Cybeles, once they fully mature into their abilities, which usually takes a few years, go completely blind. And it's this kind of interesting dichotomy and juxtaposition of being able to see what others can't see, but not being able to see what everyone else can see, which I think is just a cool storytelling element. But it also does mean that Cybeles are not only highly sought after because of their gifts, but they can be more, in some cases, more easily taken advantage of because of that lack of physical sight. So some Cybeles are effectively enslaved by people in power, whether they be money power, political power, whatever. Also, because Cybils are extremely rare, common folk don't even know they exist. And so if you're a parent and your kid starts having these crazy dreams or saying they're seeing things and then they go blind, like, you're probably going to freak out a little bit and take that kid to your local town priest or something and try and do, a healing of some kind, or, in mechanical terms, we'd say a lesser or greater restoration, depending on the priest's abilities, which would do nothing in this case because it's not a disease, it's not an illness, it's just who they are as a Cybil. But there are people in this world who are very aggressively always looking for Cybils, and then will, once one is revealed, it's kind of this classic girl in a small town suddenly, goes blind for mysterious reasons and can't be healed. And then word gets around that they're seeing visions, and then some powerful figure who's a wolf in sheep's clothing comes and offers to, says, oh, I have that your girl is gifted and needs training, and I can provide this magical training, and then they're never seen again, kind of a thing. I mean, it's really tragic. But that will be important for the story. These Cybils play an important role in the overall campaign. These girls who can see what no one else can see, or what most people cannot see, but cannot see what others can see. So it's kind of cool. But they heard this word Cybil on the ship. And then there was a girl around that age group who was taken. So they're already putting together, okay, so some girl who has some gift of foresight was taken off of the ship. What's going on? So that's kind of a cool thing, but they're on Akoi Island still trying to survive and escape. That's just a thing that's happening somewhere else that they happen to get caught up in. And so what the players do not know is that, so here's what's going down. I'll give you the lowdown, my beloved, lovely audience. There is an auction that is going to be taking place in the city of Satis here in the very near future. This auction is held by a group called the Order of the Black Rose. They are a secret underground sort of black market trading group, and once a year, during a festival called Glowtide, which we will get into in a later video, they hold a secret black market auction of extremely high value and rare items. Some of these items are banned, some of them are contraband, there's drugs, but this year they will have a Cybil up for sale. And Satis is a city that does have some underground slave trading, which is a very nasty business and it's very ugly. But I, as a DM, as someone writing a world, I like having some elements of things that are very nasty and very ugly, because you get to change that. Like the players, they're going to have an opportunity to we'll see what they decide to do, but they're going to have an opportunity to really change things and turn ugly things into beautiful things. But in order to do that, you have to have ugly things. So there's this auction, and they captured the Cybil, and there's a couple of groups that are going to be very, very interested in, again, a girl that can see the future or possible futures and look in on, scry essentially on other leaders, other powerful figures, their rivals, people with money, people they want to frame, blackmail. I mean, think about the power that you have if you have the ability to see behind closed doors and see potential futures. I mean, it is crazy. So that was the Cybil saga, let's call it. But it was cool because the players decided to actually look at the stuff that I had sent them and then talk about it in game. So the first time I tried that, it didn't work. Second time it did, and it was really, really cool. And I was really excited that they decided to do that. But now let's go back into the cave system that they are wandering through, following a set of footprints of someone who supposedly stole their money. I didn't mention this earlier, but they noticed that the footprints were fairly small, and I described it as almost child size, sort of implying that it could be a halfling or a rogue or a race of that kind, or it could be someone who's just really young. You don't really know. One thing that I've picked up from other DMs that I've tried to incorporate into my own practice is trying to describe, like, think of like, okay, if I didn't know what this was and I was seeing or hearing or experiencing it for the first time, what else might it be similar to that I could describe it as that's not misleading? It's just not giving away exactly what it is right away. So describing the footprints as almost child size is a way of very slight misdirection in a way, but without just saying, oh, it's a halfling shoe print. It's like, well, it could be a halfling, it could be a gnome, it could be maybe a small dwarf, it could be a child. There's a number of different things that could have that size shoe in this world, and I wanted to really play on that. So that's something that I'm working on as I'm trying to describe things to my players, is think about like, what else could it sound like, and describe it as being like that first, before they discover what it really is. And again, not really trying to deceive them, just adding more flavor to the way that I'm describing things. Unless, if they roll super high on a perception, then, it makes more sense to describe it in a more straightforward way. It just depends on the situation. As a DM, that's a judgment call that you make. Back to the cave, they fight the carrion crawlers. Now, before that carrion crawler room, there was actually a split in two directions. One led to basically a cavern where they would have to swim underwater for a period of time before coming up on another side. And then the other path led to the carrion crawler room. And both parties decided to not do the water route, and the water scared them, which I thought was kind of interesting, and kind of made sense at a lower level party. Now, I did have a water genasi in the second party who was able to swim a lot more easily, but in part of the challenge or the encounter of the water is you get a certain way, and there's like this hungry seaweed plant that is trying to grab them, and it's like I think I made it like a DC 11 strength save, like not very high DC, because like there is water and there's suffocation and breathing like issues, but I just wanted it to be something that was a little bit more interesting than just swimming straight through an underwater cavern. But one thing that I've done in my notes here is actually I have different places where they could find the same magic item. So for example, or same note. So for example, I mentioned in the last video, which you haven't watched on session 1, I encourage you to watch it because it gives context to everything here. In the last video, in the carrion crawler room, I mentioned they found a letter that I was seeding some information for later, but I thought they might not go into the carrion crawler room, or they may not check the body for that letter. So where else could I leave that letter? Same thing with the water option. And after you go through both the water and the carrion crawler room, the cavern kind of leads back together. So it is essentially one path. It's just different ways of getting to the same place. But I was like, well, but if I'm giving different ways of getting to the same place, if I leave something somewhere that they might miss, like, and if I really want them to have that, like the map of the world, where else could I leave that map of the world for them to potentially find? And again, it's up to them to find it still, but there are some things that I think are worth leaving in multiple places, and then I just have to remember if they've already found it, then like it's not there again. It's not like there's a map here and a map here and a map here. It's the map will be in whichever of these places they happen to find it. That kind of a mentality. And in the water thing, I actually have a magical item that I made that they could find that was like trapped in there from someone who had tried to swim it long ago and failed. Got caught by the seaweed or the grappling plants, underwater plants. And they decided to not go that route, which means that magical item in theory is still there, but it's not. I'm just going to put it somewhere else in the world that they could potentially find it. And I put it somewhere else and they also didn't find it there. So it's going to come up eventually, but I don't need to force it on them or be like, here it is. Like, it's just, I'm giving multiple opportunities for the same thing. And what's great is if they don't find it, then that's something that gets to be a cool item they find somewhere else. And, you get to recycle some of your prep that way, which is kind of interesting, kind of cool. But for the letter, I was like, okay, if they don't find it in the carrying crawler room, there's gonna be down the, like, further down in the cave system, it opens up to this massive cavern where the ceiling is like caved in and there's sunlight shining in, and like 150 feet up, and there's a massive jungle that's now grown in where the ceiling has caved in. So there's like a cave jungle in a way, mini jungle, and within that jungle there's an abandoned campsite. And I decided, like, well, if they don't find the letter in the carrying crawler room, they could find it in the abandoned campsite if they decide to search it. And if they don't find it in either of those two places, then that letter just doesn't get found, and Garthak gets to be a character that they learn about later. You know, this is not super important to the story. It was just another way of adding flavor and interest to things and saying, like, hey, there's other people that have been in this cave, and seeding or implying motivation, like this guy went into this cave to look for this temple to Merkel, so it's a way of telling them a little bit foreshadowing, like what's coming, and his motivation is to save his brother because there's something really valuable in there. So now I'm foreshadowing what's to come, giving motivation for a body that's already there. So just that kind of like combination of things I think is really cool, because it gives more more depth and layering to the world. And you think, like, oh, that sounds like a ton of work, but it's actually really not that hard, because it's like I already knew I wanted a temple to Merkel in this space, and I already had this idea for this Garthak figure. So it's like, well, how do I connect the two? Well, the temple has something valuable, and this, maybe Garthak has a brother that wants to free him. Boom. Like, it's, so that's where, you know, you can, I like to, if I'm like fleshing out an area, I kind of just throw just some random shit in there, and then think about, okay, now how could this connect? And then in the process of that, maybe I'll change something. Maybe I'll say, like, oh, you know, maybe originally the temple to Merkel didn't have a skull made of pure diamond, but then I thought, well, it needs to have something of value in it. Otherwise, why would someone go there? And so then now the temple to Merkel has a skull made of pure diamond in it. And so that's why that's kind of how, not just how my process of world building has been to this point, is I start just writing a bunch of stuff and then ask the question of how it could connect together. And as I make the connections, then I refine the things individually to make it, not that everything is one cohesive whole, it's just more like making the world feel connected and living and breathing in that way. And like, there's people with their own motivations and desires, that things that they're wanting to do, and how do I show that and not just tell it? So for example, I've told the players that Bessar is in an age of abundance and discovery, and the old, long forgotten Niscarian Empire has many ruins scattered throughout the continent that are now being discovered, and people are forming adventuring parties. There's like an adventuring fad. So it's one thing to say all of that. It's another thing to show a dead adventurer who is actually going to a long lost temple or ruin in search of something, and they died in the process, and here's a little journal that tells their story. It makes the, oh, adventuring is a fad and some people are idiots and don't know what they're doing and get in over their head. It's telling versus showing, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show and not just tell. Sometimes you have to just tell, but that's what I'm doing. So anyways, they go into massive cavern, open ceiling, sunlight, mini jungle. I threw some like yellow spotted mushrooms in there just because I thought it'd be fun. And I just want, some of the stuff I did in the very, very early on in this Okoe Island arc was very much of just, I want to see what they're going to do. I want to throw stuff in front of the players, in front of the party, that contextually makes sense. Like, a random jungle on a mysterious island could have like funky ass mushrooms. Like, there's, you know, that makes sense. But I also wanted to, again, as a new DM and working with players that I didn't know very well, especially the second go around, I wanted to see what they would do. You know, like if I throw something in front of you, what are you going to do? That helps me as a DM know for the future, okay, so when I've did this before, this is how they responded. So I can kind of guess they may respond in a similar way in a similar situation in the future. Now, maybe they won't, but it just helps me learn my players a little bit better. So that's why I like to throw this random stuff in there and see how risk averse are they? How adventurous are they? Are they going to try everything? If I throw random mushrooms, are they going to ignore them? Are they going to collect them and try and study them? Are they going to eat them and just see what happens? So the mushrooms I did, it's like roll a D8 and a random effect happens, like, and nothing is particularly dramatic. Some of them are a little positive, some of them are slightly negative, but it's relatively mild. I did something similar too. So you have the mushrooms, and then you have the abandoned campsite, and then a little bit later, they come across this remarkably well-preserved, but kind of at an angle, kind of implying that, you know, this whole thing like it caved in on itself at one point in time. Remarkably well-preserved fountain that had water still shooting out of it. It's magic. And if they drink it, they got like 1d8 temporary hit points. And again, it was just another thing like, okay, mushrooms, a little bit more iffy, but a magic fountain with like water, maybe it's great. Who knows? I just wanted them to, I wanted to see what they would do. And after that, finally you come up to the first real fork in the road where they could do one of two things. Option A, follow a natural staircase that leads out of this cavern up into the open world where now you have full access to the island. You can do whatever you want. Or option B, you see it in front of you, a massive 40-foot tall carving of a skull with stalactites for teeth coming from the top jaw. This very well may be the entrance to the lost temple to Merkel that you read about in the letter, or in the journal, I should say. And so I gave them that option. I'm like, hey, do you want to? And of course, the question they ask is, hey, can we see any footprints? And they rolled a high enough survival where they were able to see there's footprints leading in and out of this temple. So someone went in and came out already. And so it was up to them what they decided to do. Both groups decided to go straight into the temple, which I thought was interesting. I thought it was very interesting. And so they went into the temple to Merkel. Now, this temple is something that I tweaked a little bit between the two campaigns, but for the most part remained the same. And we're going to talk about that really briefly because it's an interesting set of encounters. So before we dive into that, I'm going to tell you what the players did not know of what's already happened. So this halfling rogue who stole their money already went into this temple, happened to stumble upon it and decided like, hey, I want to go see what's in here. And so they went into the temple, being a rogue, able to man it to, solve traps, pick locks, and avoid trouble, stealth around, was able to relatively easily go in and out of the temple unseen, grabbed the diamond skull, and left already. Now, as they went into the temple, I had a few encounters. And again, these are early days of me even making encounters. But I'm like, okay, I'm trying to balance combat with like puzzles and other type, just create some variety, but also with this, it's a theme for, Merkel, Lord of Bones, God of Undeath, or a God of Undeath. So, or God of Death, Undeath, all of the above. So they go into this temple. You enter through the carving of the skull into a hexagonal chamber with pillars made of bone. And in the center of a chamber is an ornately decorated sarcophagus where the lid has already been pushed open. Looking inside this sarcophagus, you see not a corpse, not an empty deathbed, but a set of stairs leading down into a very dim, purplish hue lit hallway. And that is the entrance to the temple to Merkel. And I think that's where we're going to stop today's video. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the temple to Merkel and what each party did in that temple. That will be the next video, and we'll see you as we continue the story there.